The White House announced a plan today to let Americans import prescription medication from Canada, which has left some on this side of the border concerned about possible knock-on effects to Canada's pharmaceutical system. The CBC's Katie Simpson is with us for more. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
So what exactly came out of Washington this morning? What was the announcement?
There was an announcement from the Trump administration that the Trump administration will start looking at proposals for ways to safely import drugs that are less expensive into the United States from Canada, as well as overseas markets. This is a massive concern in the United States. Just to give you one example, the cost of insulin in the United States is roughly 10 times higher than what it is in Canada. I was speaking with someone today about the cost of insulin, and she explained to me that Canadians can spend anywhere out of pocket $150 to $300 a month on insulin, whereas in the United States, it's closer to $1,500 to $3,000 a month. So this, understandably, and this has always been a massive election issue in the United States, given some of the challenges around healthcare costs, drug prices. So today, as the Democrats are holding a series of debates, and healthcare is a massive issue that they want to campaign on, the Trump administration comes out with this announcement saying that it will look at some of these proposals. States can come forward and make a proposal. Different pharmacies can come forward and make proposals on ways to ensure that safe drugs are getting into the United States, and perhaps that do cost less, whether they're coming from Canada or other places. There has been a lot of pushback from the pharmaceutical lobby in the U.S. It is incredibly powerful, and that's why some of these drug prices have been allowed to go unchecked for so long. So there are questions about whether this will actually be effective, how quickly any changes could actually happen. Getting things approved in the United States could take months to years, and some American news outlets are reporting it's very likely they're going to get challenged in the courts. But at this stage, the Trump White House says it's open to these ideas, and it's looking to proposals to approve them.
And that's also generated some questions on this side of the border. What are the concerns being raised here in Canada, and by who?
There are a wide range of opinions on this. We've heard from the Canadian, the Pharmacists Association. They're concerned that, Canada is 10 times smaller than the United States, and their big concern is how are Canadian pharmacists going to stay stocked with appropriate amounts of medication if the Americans, which is a much larger market, are trying to tap into that. The other concern is that we spoke with Kimberly Hansen from Diabetes Canada, and there are concerns that right now there is a drug shortage problem in Canada. Even though we spoke with Diabetes Canada, the shortage is not about insulin, but in general, there are shortages and there are concerns. And so we asked her about this, and have a listen.
We know that Health Canada and other agencies monitor drug shortages on an ongoing basis, so we do have comfort that there is a safety net in place. But we have heard very recently that there have been some small temporary local shortages that show that there can be a real problem when you think about an entire state or multiple states being able to bulk import insulin.
So that's the big concern here, is whether it's different drugs, whether things are imported in bulk. It's not necessarily, the caravans coming across the border to individually buy insulin at a pharmacy, say in Windsor, Ontario, in a border town there. But there are concerns about what happens to Canadian drug supplies when there is bulk buying.
And what about the federal government then? What is their initial response to this?
Well, it appears that this may have caught some in Ottawa off guard. Our colleagues tried to catch up with the health minister. She was at the Delta Hotel earlier today, but then was not available for anything on camera. But she did put out a statement a little bit later saying, "We constantly monitor Canada's drug supply. We'll be working closely with health experts to better understand the implications for Canadians, and will ensure there are no adverse effects to the supply or cost of prescription drugs in Canada. We're in touch with U.S. officials and look forward to discussing today's announcement with them." I spoke with a source that told me there was no immediate heads up, a source with direct knowledge of the situation. But however, there had been a larger conversation about this, so it's not necessarily a surprise, but that's where it is.
All right. Thanks, Katie. The CBC's Katie Simpson. So should Canadians be worried about this new policy in the U.S.? What should policymakers here be keeping an eye on? Dr. Joel Lection is a professor emeritus at the School of Health Policy and Management at York University. He joins me now from Toronto. Hi, Dr. Lection. Nice to see you.
Hi, Vashi.
Thanks for your time. Let me start off just by asking you initially, does what you've heard coming from Washington this morning, do you think, will it work? What they're proposing, and I know it's kind of basic at this point, not too detailed, but what they're proposing, would that actually lower the price of drugs in the United States?
In one word, no. this is largely a sham for a number of reasons. First of all, it's not going to apply to the really expensive products like the biologics. We're talking here about things like Humira or Remicade, drugs that are being used to treat various forms of arthritis or inflammatory bowel disease. Those are biologics. They run in the range of $30,000 to $40,000. They're not going to be covered. Insulin isn't going to be covered. And the United States could import every drug in Canada and it still wouldn't solve their problem because, as Katie Simpson was saying, they're 10 times larger than us. The main problem in the United States with drug prices is that they rely on the market. And when we're talking about brand name drugs, those are the ones that are really expensive. Brand name drugs, because they're covered by a patent, don't have any competition. And the United States, unlike every other Western country, doesn't negotiate prices with the drug companies. They let the market run free, and the market just doesn't work.
So so let's separate the impact on the United States from the impact on Canada. The concerns that Katie mentioned that have been raised here about the potential impact on drug supply in this country. What do you think of those concerns?
So you have to distinguish between generics and brand name drugs. It's the generics that are in that we have drug shortages of. And by and large, because there are more companies making generics in the United States and more competition, generic prices in the US tend to be lower than ours. So the United States isn't going to be importing generics from Canada. They're going to be importing brand name drugs. Caravans led by Bernie Sanders or other people that come across the border, 100 people, 200 people, they make no difference in the drug supply in Canada. It's the large-scale importing by U.S. states for civil servants or their Medicaid population. Medicaid is the plan that covers people on low income. If they're importing large quantities of brand name drugs, that's where we could potentially see a problem.
And that is because they could, because of their negotiating position, because of their size, relative size to us?
Their size. California's got more people than all of Canada.
Right.
California wants to import. As I said, there goes the entire drug supply potentially of Canada.
So what does the federal government do in response then? What kinds of things should policymakers be looking at doing in response?
Well, from the purely Canadian perspective, I think that what we should be doing is talking about limiting the exports to the U.S. To an amount that would still guarantee that there is an adequate supply of the brand name drugs here in Canada. On a larger perspective, I mean, Ottawa could be talking to the U.S. about what we do to keep our drug prices low and encouraging the Americans to emulate what we do and what every other Western country does.
If they were to, so on the first part of your answer there, the idea of sort of setting a cap that ensures, a cap on exports that ensures that we still have the adequate amount of supply when it comes to brand name drugs, is that something that, how would that work? I mean, would they just impose that? Would there be, I know it's, there'd obviously be political considerations considering the relationship with the U.S., but aside from those, how might that work?
Well, I'm not a trade lawyer. So I can't give you the details, but my understanding is that Ottawa does have the power, or could give itself the power, to impose export restrictions on prescription drugs. I'm sorry, I can't go any further.
That's fine. No worries at all. And one other thing I wanted to touch on with you, and you mentioned and we've heard it a lot today, talk about the drug shortage in this country. Can you, and you qualified again the difference between generic and brand name drugs. Can you explain to us a bit about what that drug shortage looks like and what what the consequences of it are, even at this juncture, regardless of what the U.S. decides?
Sure. So again, we're primarily talking about generic drugs. So, for instance, generic drugs have lower profit margins than brand name drugs. So you're a generic company, you make 10 drugs, 5 of them you have a good profit margin on, 5 of them you don't. You may decide to cut back on the 5 that don't give you a lot of money. The other problem is that the large drug companies and the generic companies for reasons of economics, are outsourcing their supply of the active ingredients. This is the part of the drug that actually does the work. And those active ingredients primarily are being made in China or India, where there are looser manufacturing standards. There are often problems discovered in the factories. Something happens, you can't get your drugs coming from those factories, and you end up with a drug shortage.
All right, I'll leave it there. I appreciate your insight this afternoon. Thanks, Dr. Lection.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Vashi Kapellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.